Thank you. So thank you for making the session. We're really happy that you're here. This session's going to be, because we were conscious that you were probably going to be filled up with ideas and filled up maybe with not as much energy as you were at the beginning. This is going to be very interactive. We're going to have you moving around, talking with people so that you don't have to sit and listen. You're actually going to be part of the process. That's going to make it a little bit crazier, maybe, but the group isn't too immensely large. So we should be actually fine with that. So just to walk you through what's going to happen so that you have an idea, and then I'm going to hand it over to Greta. So we're going to do a quick introduction and welcome. We're then going to do a brainstorming. So have your phones ready, and we're going to put a QR code on the screen, and you'll actually be able to put in words and basically answer the question we're going to ask. It's going to be sort of a future-oriented question, and then you're going to see all of those things turn into a word cloud, which is kind of cool. And that will kind of be our visioning exercise for where do you think we're going to go. Then there'll be a couple speakers just very quickly reacting to this as far as sort of some of the future stuff. Then we're going to break you into groups of basically 10, depending on, we're going to do a final count when everything's done. And then you're going to be discussing the how do we get there. So first of all is the vision, and then how do we get there? What are your ideas for that? And then you're going to come back and share a little bit of your group discussion so that everyone has a sense of what went on in the different groups. And that'll be the sort of summary of that session. Hopefully that makes sense. It'll make sense as we go along if it doesn't. So I was supposed to read your introduction, wasn't it?
Don't even.
No?
I think everyone knows me at this point.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Fabulous. So, distinguished guests, it's so great and it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to this session on the future of elephants and people in Africa and Asia. There's a lot of elephant experts here. There's a lot of coexistence experts here. So we're going to pool on that in this session. It's been an incredibly stimulating conference for us all, I think, networking, engaging in the many layers of human-wildlife conflict at macro level and micro level. If you were in the sessions this morning on elephants, focusing on elephants, we heard fascinating examples of research, data, mitigation methods, insurance, early warning systems, old and new perspectives. And now in this room, we yet again explore one of the most colossal conflicts, both in terms of species and complexities, that between people and elephants. How do we find ways of coexisting long-term with one of our planet's largest, best known, most studied, admired, and feared mega herbivores? As we continue to face the burdens of the post-pandemic world, economic recessions, increasing geopolitical tensions, and the effects of climate change, we couple that thinking about where elephants and people are actually found, which are usually underpinned with decades of inequality, extreme poverty, and vast social environmental injustice. To be very honest, it's a lot. It can become very overwhelming. And I don't mean to be the prophet of doom, but we all in here know that we do have the solutions to buy us time in maybe the short to mid-term. But if we don't start tackling the long term, we know that it will simply unravel all progress. And in today's session, there are no rule books, really, because it's not rules that change the world, it's those who are willing to break the rules, it's those who are willing to think outside of the box. So I want us to start musing and thinking about what does the future of living with elephants look like across the 50 African and Asian range states in 30 to 50 to 100 years from now. Let us set the scene. We all agree on the immense value and significance of elephants as environmental engineers, crucial to our ecosystems and carbon sequestration, as well as vitally important for our cultures, traditions, and spiritual symbols in our history, values, and identities. A lot of money and funding and efforts has gone towards the protection of these majestic creatures and their habitats, but yet here we are, still struggling to figure it out. It's no secret that elephants need a lot of space. And to put it quite simply, they're running out of it. Across Africa and Asia, elephants suffer from severe habitat loss, fragmentation, and historic migration routes and habitats being rapidly transformed. It all comes down to the pressures, consequences, and contradictions of our uneven geographical development, power structures, socioeconomic, political, and historical realities. We also can't ignore the demographics. In 2000, Africa was home to 819 million people. Today, 1.4 billion. And by 2050, it's estimated to be 2.5 billion. The 22 countries in the world with the fastest birth rates are all African elephant ranges, except for Burundi and Gambia, which have already lost all of their elephants. In Asia, 4.4 billion already share space with elephants. And that's 13 range states. And that's estimated to grow to 5.5 billion by 2050, practically dwarfing the numbers in Africa. This isn't a simple matter of population versus conservation, but a complex issue of balancing our varied and often competing needs with that of the natural world. Environmentalists, like all of you and myself, often romanticize a time where we had over 1 million elephants in Africa. But obviously, that's because I didn't know what it meant to live alongside them or at your doorstep. In my home country, Ethiopia, there are 120 million people and somewhere between 1,300 and 2,000 elephants. And the 4 times that I've ever come this close to losing my life has always been interacting with elephants. The uncomfortable truth is that we must face this question. Can we truly sustain 300 to 400,000 elephants in Africa, the ones that we have today? And can we sustain the 25 to 45,000 Asian elephants we have in Asia today, knowing the trajectory that we are on when it comes to our economy and what we want in life? It is crystal clear also that the path to coexistence lies far outside a black and white solution. And far outside the mandates of our wildlife authorities alone. There is so much to consider when we think of a future of elephants across Africa and Asia. Questions: will capitalism finally crumble and something new be replacing our economic model? Will technology or AI save the day? Will we be able to fence off all of the protected areas around the world and create wildlife enclosures in a new way? Is that where we want to go? Will we finally find a way to close the overwhelming socioeconomic gaps that are faced by the people who share spaces with wildlife? Or will agriculture really shift and be able to feed all of the people that are coming in the future? As Brian said yesterday, the urgency of this conflict can be the very agent of the change that we need to foster adaptive endeavors, continuous learning, dialogue, and ultimately, hopefully, thanks to all of us in this room, transformation through and with this conflict. I am a realist, but I'm profoundly an optimist, and I think all of us being here means you are too. I personally envision a world, an economic model, and societies that prioritize solidarity, community, reciprocity, and a slower way of living, in harmony with our non-human kin, elephants, spiritual entities, and indigenous communities. And that harmony being the highest measure of success for any country. But how do we bridge the world we have now to the world that we envision? So as I conclude, I invite you to reflect on the questions that I'm asking back at you, and to consider your own experiences and dreams if you had a magic wand to create that world and the path to it. I'm eager to hear all of your perspectives, and hopefully we can all build that world together. Now, I hand over to Brian for the next section.
So in keeping with that, the question we want you to brainstorm on, if you pick your phone up, you should be able to then answer the question, the future of elephants. What does long-term human-elephant coexistence look like? We're thinking like 10, 15, 20 years out. This isn't the next couple months. This is trying to be a little out of the box, a little bit sort of farther forward than sometimes we, with our immediate problems and our immediate challenges around finishing a grant by the end of next week, or finishing a paper by the end of the weekend. This is more trying to go as far forward as you can. So tolerance, respect, challenging, equitable, compromise, mutual respect, these are the ones that are beginning to uncertainty. These are the things that are beginning to find their way to the center of the group. Oh, love is working closer. I feel like there's just going to be a race at this one.
Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah? Cool. Okay.
We're gonna screenshot it and try and make it bigger.
Yeah. So as the rest of the session goes on, we'll do a screenshot and make it bigger. The point of this is in part to kind of be a place to start when we get to some of the how do we get there, as a place to kind of to center ourselves a little bit around this. It's very easy to end up in your own personal challenges and the things that you have to immediately do, but part of this is really to get a sense of how we can think about this in a slightly different way. Okay? I think we're going to have some reactions to this, but also to help set the tone for the next session. So all the people who are going to sort of give reactions to this and set the tone.
So esteemed Sylvia Museiya, esteemed Celmira de Sylvia, and esteemed Ramesh Pandey, if you can come up here and I will introduce you. So to share some bios of our esteemed panelists today, we explicitly asked them to not create presentations so that they can speak freely. And we have esteemed Sylvia Museiya, who's the Principal Secretary of the State Department for Wildlife at the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Heritage in the Republic of Kenya, born into a small indigenous community in Laikipia, and with degrees in law and education, and a background in human rights, governance, and international advocacy. Prior to her current role, she served as a member of County Assembly and was chairperson of the Education Committee. Esteemed Celmira de Sylvia, Director General of ANAC, which is the Mozambique state entity for managing parks, reserves, hunting blocks, game farms, and other conservation areas around the country. Celmira was formerly governor of the province of Cabo Delgado, deputy minister of Land, Environment, and Rural Development, and also held management and leadership positions in the Ministry of Youth and Sports. And esteemed Ramesh Pandey currently serves as the Inspector General Forests and head of Project Elephant in the Government of India. He is a well-known conservationist and has been instrumental in shaping India's policies on wildlife and forest conservation. He played a crucial part in reintroduction of tigers in the Sariska Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan and the development of the Indian Rhino Vision 2020 project. As head of the Project Elephant, he is responsible of the conservation and management of elephants in India and has worked closely with state governments to address human-elephant conflict and prevent poaching. So today, the question that we are posing to our panelists is essentially the same one we just fed into. What does human-elephant conflict coexistence look like in the long term? And we'll have the African perspective as well as the Asian one.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. I'll move directly to it. What do I think of how the human and elephant coexistence look like? I think for myself, it has to give economic benefits for both sides. I say that because communities feel like elephants are a burden to them. They destroy their crops and they kill their mothers and fathers and children. They injure and maim. Farmers plant, elephants harvest. So I think for coexistence to make more space, then the wildlife economy has to coexist with other economies that are beneficial to the humans. So whether it's livestock for pastoralists or farming. And from where I come from, we have now more wildlife outside the formal government protected spaces because we have 8% of the landmass of that country under parks, national parks and national reserves. And then we have 12% in conservancies. Those conservancies are usually in community land. So it is saying that communities have found a new land use system that includes conservation, and that finally looks like a wildlife-initiated economy based on tourism, especially ecologies. So when you look at the situation as it is now, the conservancy set up, the community puts away some of its land for conservation, then that land is populated by wildlife. Mostly is what we call the big five in my country: elephants, lion, rhino, buffalo, and which is the fifth one? So out of that wildlife, it is what an investor would come and put up a beautiful eco-lodge so that tourists, especially very high-end exclusive tourism, where Richard Branson's and the rest of the multi-billionaires own or run or visit those eco-lodges. You find a whole 56,000 acres of land with maybe just a 20-bed capacity lodge, each selling at as much as $5,000 a night. So the community around there have taken the periphery corner of that land, and they are keeping some small stock of livestock, some few cattle and things like that. So whereas because of the drought situation that was referred to earlier by my very good friend Barbara, eventually we will go to conflicts for resources, water and pasture. And so it is inevitable that communities and the elephants will meet at either protected spaces, either parks, or within conservancies. So we have seen one or two models where wildlife economy coexists with livestock through management plans, so that land is hived off, there's a fencing system, or there is an enclosure system, and one activity feeds into the other. And in such circumstances, the investments that are put inside conservancies are such that if it is leasing, the rent or the leases, the payments made out of that land directly go to the landowners, such as the Masai Mara, the famous Masai Mara Game Reserve. All the conservancies around there accrue money from there. So for me, what human coexistence looks like is that we have to use shared space. We no longer have the advantage of saying they stay off in parks and we stay off in reserves, especially because we have lost so much corridors and dispersal areas. So we have to agree that we have to coexist. And it is worse for me because the insurance scheme that Barbara was referring to, one of the major challenges is that it will not insure people who are in protected spaces. And these communities have to stay in those protected spaces. So we have to look at how the elephants benefit from the communities in the sphere of they have been given some good land to live on, but also that the economy is being derived from this wildlife benefits the communities and not just the investors who put up investments inside there. It's a very long answer. Thank you.
Madam Sylvia, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to share with this audience about human-elephant conflict in Mozambique. So savanna elephants are part of so-called megafauna, as we know, and they require space. And in Mozambique, we have 26% in conservation areas, in terrestrial. While we talk about elephants, we say 26%, and we have about 12% in marine. But focusing in elephants, I'd like to say that theoretically, elephant range covers 52% in Mozambique. And in 2003, the population was estimated to 21,500 elephants. And this is the subpopulation in southern, central, and northern Mozambique. And all of these elephants are considered in conservation areas. So in 1999, a national strategy was adopted aiming to increase population by 20% until 2010, and also foreseeing the net growth of 20% for wildlife revenue for the population. and our national strategy was approved in 2010. It was for the period of 2010 to 2015. Between 2009 and 2014 were a massive poaching pressure, with the population experiencing 48 decline, and Mozambique was the major trade offer for the global market of ivory, especially in Asia. And it appears that the elephant number have stabilized around 2019, where we had at that time 10,800 for whole country. And looking at the space the elephants needs to move, we know that in average elephants can move per day 50 kilometers per day, not in the straight line, but you can see. And if we fly the conservation areas, we can see different kind of vegetation. We can understand and identify where the elephants were moving for more years ago, spreading the seeds everywhere. So, and according with our biodiversity law, we were discussing with, especially in training judges, looking at the way they convict people or the people were arrested. One of the important things that our judges were not understanding, what is the value of elephant? Why we should convict someone for so many years because of one elephant, for instance, for killing an elephant. So we had very interesting debates on how many seeds, how many trees an elephant can spread per year, for instance, and what are the conditions of those seeds. The seeds are coming from the elephant's stomach differently from the seeds that we put. So we can see the difference. If you want to try, we can see the difference in terms of the rapidity of growth of a seed coming from an elephant's stomach comparing with a normal seed. So we were saying, we just adopted in Mozambique saying that an elephant is a forest engineer, and also an elephant is the source of the forest. So if you kill an elephant, just try to understand how many forests we lose. So based on this kind of concepts, we have courts, we have attorneys, national attorney, all chain in the justice, focusing on try to convict to make sure that no one will do again. So just to have you an idea that the one people, our laws convicts people all chain, the transporters, those ones who just found with any part of the fauna, and it can be from 16 to 30 years in prison. So it's just to say that it's a very heavy law that we have in Mozambique. This is just because we need exactly to protect the elephants, looking the relation between elephants and the forests. And I would like also to say that in our country, the people are growing very, very fast, population. For instance, in 1997, we had 16 million, and in 2023, we have 38 million. And as they are growing, they are also growing inside the parks and reserves. Most of our parks and reserves have huge people inside. And obviously this range of birth in a daily basis we have is also in the conservation area. So this is a pressure inside the parks. And urbanization is also progressing very quickly, and rural population depends on the natural resources and what they can produce inside the area. So electricity is also progressing, but as you know, Mozambique is one of the countries with a massive gas reserves, and in next years we can see the differences in electricity and gas. And we hope that the gas will support us to make people stop cutting more trees. in the countries. So back to the question, I would like to say that the nomadic lifestyles helps people to run away of the conflict, but sometimes they really meet the animals and the conflict occurs. And the elephants also, as any other country, destroy crops, and we have all-time people with problems, and we should deal with them on a daily basis. And our conservation areas mostly are unfenced. And to be unfenced, obviously, we can find a group of people talking about the ecosystem itself, because the elephants, they really need to pursue the way they know. But if they find a fence, obviously, if they see what they want in other side, we know they make damage that we can not set day by day with the elephants. But at other side, we can find, obviously, people living in those areas saying that we want fence. For instance, Niassa is a special reserve with the dimension of Denmark territory, just to have an idea. It's a country. And inside the Niassa, we have a district, a whole district inside Niassa. People living there with their normal activities, they live there. And Niassa is also surrounded by 7 different districts and 7 small territories which are surrounding. And in Mozambique, our administration, all parks depends on our own administration. So within the limits, who take care is the National Administration for Conservation Areas, our institution. So we have huge responsibility, not only in protecting animals and the law enforcement, but also in integrated development. So what we can offer to the people and how we can day by day try to avoid this human and elephant conflict. Niassa is one of these cases, but we can find other places with this pressure every day, especially with the crops. So this is what we are dealing with in the daily basis. So then, how we can get there? One important issue that you would like to see there, conditions to analyze how human and elephants can coexist in that situation. The population are growing day by day. In some parks, for instance, the Maputo National Park, which are small parks, we move them to other parks with more space, and we can obviously manage them in such a condition, because they, in fact, they are growing. But in those areas where we have enough space, we are focusing on the ecological corridors, because now even people, they are asking. We know that we passed for several situations in Mozambique, and also for climate change. Today we cannot predict where the water will come from, so how the landscape will be destroyed with the climate change. And this is, I can tell you that for last 3-4 months we have 3 or 4 cyclones, heavy ones, and with lots of rains, and obviously the animals should move to another place. But looking at this degradation of landscape, they obviously move to another places. So we had traditional corridors, but you can also find new corridors now, because they are looking for other places with food. Because it's the same ecosystem, they cannot obviously stay within the park limits. So the question is how we can manage. Now it's interesting that the solutions are coming from the people. And weeks ago we heard from some place, because we have Kruger Park, which is nearing with the Limpopo Park, they moved there. And we have another park, which is the Banyini, they move again inside the Mozambique. Another park, which is enough, and then they go to Gonarejo in Zimbabwe. And then they come back again, the same routes, back to Kruger Park. So it's a very large way. And in those places, we can find people and farming. So what they asked us, we want to know which time of period of year which these elephants are moving. And we want also to know, because we want to avoid this kind of meeting, and unfortunately those meetings with animals. So it's important when this is coming from the people, not because they don't know, they know, but because of also the climate change. Now our challenge is also to see the new corridors the animals are using, try to find a way back to Gonarisho or to the Kruger Park again. So sometimes you say that our elephants. I don't know well, because people from Tanzania here, probably there are days that they don't see elephants in Niassa Selu, in Selu, for instance. They are outside in Niassa, and sometimes you don't also see, as happens in Kenya, Masai Mara, for instance. So the most important thing is looking at the corridors that we should focusing on, and then with the people, all actions in the field to see the way we can survive. We have example, for instance, in Vic Falls, where we can see elephants less than a meter and nothing happened. They can pass in the shops, in the streets, and nothing happened. But they are different kind, obviously, because some of those elephants did not pass through the traumatic situation. For instance, in my country where we had war, for instance, our elephants' behavior is completely different. There are people saying that the elephants from Gorongosa, they are quite different from the other places because they did pass several situations and traumatic that we should understand. So our people also should understand how our elephants behave. So focusing in the corridor, I'd like to say that it's not only the corridor, but it's looking at the benefits that we have, and the benefits for the people, and also if they really can live in those areas without any kind of problems. So I used to say, people say, normally when we talk about human-elephant conflict or human-wildlife conflict, normally we focus in people because people are there. But the most important thing, and the message that we'd like to leave here, we are trying to protect the biodiversity. So if we want, the interest of protecting biodiversity should be the interest for everyone in the field. So the magnitude of the problems are very, very high, and we think that the magnitude of resources is also something that we should, all of us, focusing on most effective measures of mitigation of these conflicts in the large scale, and especially when we see the medium and long-term measures. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And now for the Asian perspective from Mr. Ramos. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with the information that India is celebrating 50 years of Project Tiger this year, and it has completed such a long journey, and today the country has showed the way how the lost population and the habitats of one of the most charismatic species can be revived. Many of you would be knowing that when the Project Tiger started, it had a concept of protecting the species in a protected area. However, after end of 2 decades, and after learning the success and failures of Project Tiger, in 1991-92, India started another project, which was focused to another species, and that was Project Elephant. And Project Elephant has completed 30 years And I would like to emphasize here that there had been a distinct and different approach when the country started Project Elephant. On one hand, when we started Project Tiger, we were focusing to the protected area. But when we started Project Elephant 30 years back, we knew that elephant is a species which cannot be protected or managed, putting the species confined to a protected area. So we adopted an approach of landscape basis 30 years back. And we thought that the elephant reserves, of course for the management and conservation of the area, should have protected areas which has larger degree of protection as per the country's premier law, areas which are adjoining to those protected areas and they are territorial forest or social forestry area which do not have that degree of protection given to them, and then areas which are used by the people, maybe the community lands or the private lands. 30 years back, we knew that elephant is a species which can only be managed with the concept of coexistence. It moves from one place to another. And this is not possible that we manage elephant as we started managing tigers. And you would be happy to know that even in last 2 years, we have added approximately 4,000 square kilometer area by declaring 3 new elephant reserves in 3 distinct landscapes. One in Tarai of Uttar Pradesh, another down south in the Agastya Malai, and third one is in the central landscape. And today, we have 33 elephant reserves encompassing an area of 80,000 square kilometers and protecting 30,000 elephants, which is the 60% of the total population of the Asian elephant in the entire land, the range states distribution. So the focus or the issue for which we have gathered here, that how should we see the conservation of elephants with the concept of coexistence, has already been practiced for last 3 decades. And if you see the kind of cultural ethos and religious values and the aesthetic sense the elephant has in the Indian tradition, it was from time immemorial. But we also knew that we cannot assume this concept of coexistence just by thinking and having a concept of elephant reserves, managing the elephants in a larger landscape cannot be taken for granted. For that, we have to delineate the corridors to connect the habitats. Secondly, we have to have better and responsive mechanism in place to deal the human-elephant conflict issues. We should have robust policies and program in place so that the people who are adversely getting affected from the human-elephant conflicts are not marginalized, and they are not, they should not feel that conservation is putting them on the, in a position which is not comfortable for them. Because one thing we also know, that conservation leads conflicts. If you will conserve a species, its number will go up. It is going to create negative interfaces. It's a successful indicator. I have seen in areas where the tiger population had got down and the leopards had occupied the deforest. As soon as the protection was given and the population of tiger bounced back, the leopard was pushed out on the fringes. Immediately in the communities, the conflicts increased. So we also believe in this understanding that conservation leads conflicts. We should accept it upfront. But at the same time, we should be sensitive enough to be responsive, to be communicative, to be clear that what do we want on one hand for the conserving the species, on the other hand, securing the basic necessities of the people. And in the time when the communication has become very fast and the perceptions are changing and getting masked with the fake information, yeah, it's a big challenge when the values are also changing, especially in the young generation. I mean, the way the grandfathers were considering the elephant as a god may not be the new generation considering in the same way. So what we perceive that there is no confusion that elephant can be conserved without considering the concept of the coexistence. One. Number two, there must be a robust system in place to respond, to give proper response and to mitigate human elephant conflicts. And probably we have to develop new way to communicate to the younger generation to win their trust and to also educate them that why the species are important. Because in the Western world, the young generation is more pro wildlife, but in the developing countries, the young generations may or may not be I would say that pro conservation as a, I mean, many a time it becomes fashionable to say that I believe in conservation, but in areas which are remote and where there is a need of basic education or the other infrastructure requirements, sometimes conservation takes a backseat. So the bigger challenge is that how to communicate with the communities to keep their confidence intact in the system, to protect the corridors so that the movement of the gene and the movement of the species from one landscape to the another is possible. Probably we have to galvanize the talks which are related to the transboundary issues, because, for instance, if I take the example of India, elephant moves from India to Nepal, India to Bhutan, India to Myanmar, India to Bangladesh, and similarly from one province to another, the elephant moves. So the system should be probably more strong, the mechanism should be more better, so that at least the real-time information is passed on to the agencies and we can avoid the conflict situation. I hope that I have touched upon some of the issues which are relevant to deliberate upon that how the elephant conservation can be done, and there is no doubt that we can have any other model than having the living with the elephants in coexistence model. Thank you very much.
So now we're going to break into small groups and basically answer this question for you, because a big part of that is we've heard your visioning exercise was there. Some of the ideas have just been discussed now as far as some of the realities and some of the challenges that are faced by the different areas. The goal now is for you to answer some of these questions directly. There are some of the world's leading experts on this topic in this group right now, and so we want to actually use the time, because very few opportunities have ever existed, from my understanding, where people working on Asian elephants and African elephants actually sit together and to sort of collaborate a little bit on, obviously there are different challenges, but is there some value looking at this from a slightly longer term perspective? So could I have all the facilitators come up here real quick? So we're going to have some facilitators who are going to help you with your discussions. 3, 4. Okay, so you've got your number. The question you're going to answer as a group is this: how do we get there? You have the visioning exercise, you have the ideas in 10 or 20 years. How do we get there? You've got 20 minutes to talk about it, and then you're going to tell us about it. 20 minutes, find your facilitator. So we're going to go group to group. I'm going to hand this to you. So group 1, stand up. So these are the summaries from the different groups. We're going to start with group 1.
Hi. I've just kind of written down 4 points that seem to be brought out at the end. And one of these was vertical integration. We talked a lot about integrating stakeholders' perspectives kind of at the local level, the regional level, and the trans-boundary level, and ensuring that kind of, when we asked about kind of responsibilities, understanding that it's everyone's responsibility to kind of partake in this problem and finding solutions. And so having an approach where we can kind of integrate stakeholders' perspectives at every level. We also discussed maybe about how to do this better, how to foster exchanges better, how to talk between stakeholders better and reach consensus better between different groups. And then we looked a little bit at developing kind of context-specific land use planning and understanding that maybe at the moment some land use planning to consider kind of elephant movements isn't necessarily context-specific. It's maybe taken, like one approach taken from one country and then just transported to another country. And so we were looking and thinking about maybe actually developing much more context-specific kind of approaches to land use planning. And a final one, just kind of education of youths who maybe don't have that kind of lived experience of coexistence with animals and just trying to get them on board as well. So I think that's it.
We had a very lively discussion. We covered a lot of different topics, but we just came out with one big idea, which was around politics and ensuring that the vision is based on sound policies. We need really sound policies, and for those policies to be effective, we need to involve a wide range of decision makers. So not just environment ministries and forestry ministries, but a whole range of decision makers and researchers. We need more interdisciplinarity. And including if we look at this conference, there are some decision makers here, but they're relatively few. So people were saying the next conference, it'd be great to get people who can actually make those decisions to be here, to come up with some radical coexistence plans, acknowledging, as Brian has said, that there will always be conflict. We're managing conflict, to try and come up with radical plans that are future-proofed, that go beyond the 4 or 5 year political cycle. And lastly, that we have some more sharing between Africa and Asia, specialists and decision makers.
Well, we had a lively discussion as well, and we covered lots of topics. One of the main themes that came out was the need for long-term planning to make sure that elephant corridors were integrated into human development decision-making, and that decision-making should be integrated at all levels. To make sure to help to support tolerance and coexistence, and the local communities were really key to being party to that. A point was made that we already have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of research, so it's time to get on with implementing. And a long sentence that the group came together with was for the vision for the future is well-planned, evidence-based, well-financed, with local buy-in and co-governance.
So I'll try my best to summarize a lot of the different elements that we got from this group. But basically, we were talking about global financing for local solutions that has an ecocentric approach and ethical treatment of community, particularly in women empowerment and redefining conservation education, because all these issues that we're facing, its root causes from bigger issues like climate change and the effects of capitalism that we've been living in.
So in our group, there were several very, very good ideas. I don't think I have enough time to tell them all. But they came to a consensus that the coexistence will be determined by human population density and distribution. And three other very important points is sustainable intensified agriculture, spatial planning, and understanding the economic value of living with elephants.
Well, thank you all. Of course, we have some recurring themes. It seemed like we all agree in many things, but what we came up at the end was increase indigenous awareness and share responsibility at every level, from local to global. Collaborate and share lessons of success and failure, and remember our traditional values and not only the economic benefits.
So now we're just going to have a very quick reflection from two people, and they'll be very quickly introduced, but basically a minute or two just to try to summarize. I mean, a lot has been said today, a lot of different perspectives, whether it be government or community or conservation, and this is a way of kind of pulling it all together in like basically 4 minutes.
By the way, I'm really impressed by how much you guys got through in that short time, so this is very exciting. But Ahimsa, my colleague here at the IUCN's Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group, is a professor at the, you can help me with how you say this. Shishwambana Tropical Botanical Garden in China. He has spent 20 years studying the ecology and conservation of Asian megafauna, particularly Asian elephants' functions in ecosystems and how to promote human-elephant coexistence. And following Ahimsa, we'll have Lockie Osborne, who has been researching the ecology of crop-raiding elephants for many years, focusing on the use of community-based conflict mitigation techniques to deter elephants from agricultural areas. He is the co-coordinator of Connected Conservation, a consultancy firm that assists communities, NGOs, governments to develop practical mitigation solutions for wildlife in the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, and is also a member of the IUCN Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I use this microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes to summarize a very complex, weak problem, so then I will not try to do a very good job, so then I will say a few things that I think is relevant. I want to say that 21st century will not be like the 20th century. So we shouldn't be looking at the problems that we were facing 50 years ago or 30 years ago. We should be looking at the problems from 20 years or 30 years or 50 years from now, okay? I'm going to talk about Asia, that is what I know, and I'm going to disappoint some of my previous students or some of people here. I do believe that there are some things that could be in our favor that have been against us in the past. Human demography can be in our favor. So then human population has been growing and has been expanding over the last, well, for a long time, but intensely in the last 100 years. But it will not be the case in this century. So then many countries will lose population. And that group said what I think was the most interesting. Coexistence will depend on the human density and distribution. So then if we can have a lot of people living in Singapore, in Shanghai's, in cities where, humans are happy to be there, the conditions are good, and we can land spare and have elephants in other places, that's a very good starting point. Of course, elephants don't like forest as such, they don't like very well conserved mature forest, so elephants will come out into these kind of gray areas. There will be a lot of overlap and a lot of areas for conflict mitigation, but that's another thing to deal with, and there are many ways to handle these things. Technology is on our side, or at least can be on our side. So then I think we'll have so much capacity to know what is happening, and if we know what to do once we have the information, we'll be much better equipped in a few years. And economic development is on our side. So I think we need a population, human communities to develop and to be better off. And that, in my opinion, includes capitalism can be a force for good, and sorry about that, and the private sector should be our ally. And I want to be very clear, what makes human-elephant conflict a problem for people is vulnerability. If you are a subsistence agriculture and then your crops are eaten, you are in trouble. But if you don't depend strictly on a small piece of land, if you are financially in a good position, you are much less vulnerable. You can cope with problems in a much better way. So that's something we want to have less vulnerable populations. And then I will finish with just... Okay.
I will be shorter than that. Thank you all. I think the takeaway lesson for me from this is goes back to when I first started looking at this problem in Africa. I went to South India and met with researchers who were working there, and I still think there's a huge amount of while the situations are different in Asia, that it's very much a model for where Africa is going quickly in terms of both elephant populations and human populations. And I think a lot of the lessons and one of the things that's been so valuable is for whatever reason there hasn't been that much overlap between people, I guess because people perceive the situations as being very different. And obviously illegal hunting of elephants was the main issue in Africa for many years, or perceived to be that. And I think now that some of those things are settling out, we're beginning to see many of these conflict issues in Africa. And I think also the idea of a triage, of realizing that in the African context that we probably have to make some very difficult decisions about which areas are viable for elephants and which areas are going to be developed for people. And also the thing I think it's exciting over the last 20 years or so, that the human side of these equations has come, I think for a lot of us, that has been a big move, because it used to, humans were always seen as just a frustration, an annoyance, something that had to be dealt with. And I think a lot of ecologists in Africa now are starting to look at these bigger issues, and so many of the next generation coming up are much more aware of these sociocultural factors that are so crucial in the management. And I think also some of the points that have come up of controlling populations and being radical in the way that we're thinking about both controlling elephant populations and controlling human populations, and deciding how and where we will all distribute ourselves across the landscape. I think it's been a really useful session, and I hope that this will garner further discussions, and if we can hopefully develop some sort of framework by which we share information more effectively between the Asian experience and the African experience. And I know we've talked about that before in the past, but I think this has inspired me certainly to push for it, and hopefully in the rest of you all will help support that movement, and maybe take some of these trends that we've discussed and try to follow up on them. Thank you.
Brilliant. Luckily, this is the last session, so you can leave the chairs where they are, and I won't get into trouble for you having destroyed this room. Thank you for an inspiring conversation and conversations. As I think the speakers have said, the responsibility also is very much on you in these interactions, and taking away some of the relationships and new connections that you've made, these last couple of days into the field, and how that might look. So, final word from Greta.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming to the session. We really recognize that 90 minutes is obviously too little to think about these big picture questions, but we hope it's laid the foundation for us to find ways to have more time together. We need to bring the experts from both continents together, all of these brilliant ideas, and I hope this is the beginning of that materializing into something. We do need a human-elephant conflict-specific conference, and hopefully we'll make that happen soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.